There's a kind of knowing that lives in your hands before it hits your mind. I've spent 31 years reading timber in the Southern Appalachians. I used to think a tree was just something you could measure and reduce to numbers. But your hands know before your mind does. You walk enough timber, and you develop a sensitivity in your chest and neck. It's not mystical, it's just 10,000 small observations you've made over the years. I'm telling you, because what I felt on Roan Mountain wasn't just my imagination. It was a real transmission, but it wasn't about stress or disease in the trees. It was something I don't have a professional category for, and I never will. My name's Thomas Avery, and I've been a forestry consultant my whole life. I know these mountains from the ground up, literally. I'm not a romantic about the mountains. I'm just a man who measures them. My wife Carol's heard the edges of this story, but not the center. I've kept it to myself for 9 years because I know how it sounds.
It's the kind of thing that invites a lot of skepticism.
Roan Mountain sits right on the Tennessee and North Carolina border. Up high, it's got this massive spruce-fir forest that's a relic of the Ice Age. It's a forest that really belongs in Canada, just hanging on up here. I went in on a Wednesday in late October, all by myself. It was just a standard 2-day assessment for some tree mortality. I had all my gear and food, and the forecast was clear and cold. By 4, I'd finished the lower section and set up camp on a flat bench. I ate and did my notes and was in my bag by 8:30. Everything was normal. The mountain was just being a mountain. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of the trees. It wasn't wind, it was this low creaking, like the trunks were shifting. He was moving, going north to south along the slope above me. I got up, put on my boots, and went outside into the cold. The night was clear, and the stars were bright. I turned off my light, looked up the slope, and saw them. Lights in the trees. The lights were small, faint, and sourceless. They hovered at mid-canopy height. They moved with an independent, purposeful rhythm. I stood there, frozen, feeling a profound sense of wrongness. I didn't call out, and I didn't move toward them. My body had made a decision for me. It was the instinct of something that didn't want to be noticed. The lights moved for 20 minutes, drifting slowly through the upper stand. They didn't come closer to my camp. They drifted further up the slope and vanished. I didn't sleep again that night. When morning came, I finished my assessment. I worked with a focused, mechanical efficiency. Coming down the mountain, I stopped at the boundary. I remembered a paper I'd read years ago. It talked about the Nunnehi, the people who are always there. The historian wrote that the Nunnehi inhabited the high places. They weren't malevolent, but they were ancient. They moved through the high forests in ways that were respected. The paper noted the movement of small, sourceless lights. I had read that paper years before. I filed it away and hadn't thought about it again. I drove back to Johnson City and sat in my kitchen. I told her the assessment had gone smoothly. All of that was true, but I didn't tell her the rest. I haven't taken a contract on Roan Mountain since that night. I've declined too, and I haven't regretted it. It's not that I'm afraid of the lights exactly. What I feel is the embarrassment of an intrusion. I was somewhere that wasn't prepared for me. I was the thing that didn't belong. The high spruce fir on Roan Mountain isn't a forest that was waiting for a guy like me. It's a relic of the Ice Age, existing long before my profession even started. It's older than the roads that brought me here, and older than the work I was doing. Whatever moves through that forest at night with those old lights has been there forever. I was the intrusion. I was the thing that didn't belong in that high, dark place. And they, whatever they are, they just kept moving. They were indifferent to me, just doing what they do in the high places. They kept going while the people below were asleep. The stars were bright, and the trees were talking in a language of creaking wood. That sound wasn't meant for me. It belonged to the mountain. I was just a witness to something I couldn't understand. They didn't stop for me. They didn't acknowledge me at all. I've decided that not being stopped for is the closest thing to grace I'll ever get. I try to remember that on the hard days. When the world feels too loud, I think back to that night. It almost works. I still walk the woods, but I walk them differently now. I'm more aware of the spaces between the trees. I'm more aware of the silence that isn't really silence. I don't look for the lights anymore. I don't go looking for answers that aren't meant for me.
I just do my work and respect the boundaries.
The mountains are still there, and they're still old and strange. They hold their secrets, and I'm content to let them. I've had my encounter, and that's enough for one lifetime. If you're ever on a mountain at night and hear the trees creaking, just keep walking. Don't look for the lights. Just keep walking and let the mountain be. I often think about the silence of that mountain. It wasn't just an absence of noise, but a heavy, pressing weight that seemed to watch me. Even now, years later, I can feel that same stillness whenever I close my eyes. People ask if I regret going up there alone. I tell them that regret is for things you could have changed. That night wasn't a choice. It was an encounter that was always going to happen. The forest floor is a graveyard of needles and ancient roots. Every step you take feels like you're walking on the history of the world. It's a place that doesn't care about your maps or your tally sheets. I keep my gear clean and organized, but it feels useless now. My diameter tape and clinometer are just tools for a world that's smaller than the one I saw on that mountain. They don't measure what really matters. The wind in the spruce fir is different. It doesn't howl. It whispers. It sounds like 1,000 voices talking at once, but you can never quite make out the words. It's a language of wood and cold air. I remember the cold. It wasn't just the temperature. It was a cold that seeped into your bones and stayed there. It was the kind of cold that makes you feel very small and very mortal. When I saw those lights, I didn't run. I couldn't. My body just locked up, like it knew that moving would be a mistake. That was the most honest reaction I've ever had in my life. I've spent 9 years trying to find a name for what I saw. I've read the history, I've looked at the maps, but nothing fits. Maybe some things aren't meant to be named. I don't go back to Roan Mountain anymore. I've turned down good work because I know that some places are better left alone. I'm not afraid, but I have respect for the boundary. Maybe that's the grace I was looking for. To be allowed to walk away and to know that there are things in this world that don't need us to understand them to exist. I remember how the light hit the forest floor that morning. The air was biting and thin, smelling of damp needles. I packed my gear, wanting to be off that mountain. Walking down, the forest began to change. The dark firs gave way to the lighter hardwoods. It felt like stepping out of a cathedral. I stopped at the boundary line, where the air shifted. I stood there for a long time, looking back up. That was when the memory of that old paper surfaced. The historian wrote about the Nunnehi, the people who are always there. He described them as ancient and connected to the high places. He mentioned the lights, just like the ones I saw. I drove back home, the mountain still heavy in my mind. I was sitting in the kitchen with Carol, drinking coffee. I told her the work went fine, keeping the rest locked away. I haven't taken a contract on Roan Mountain since that day. I've turned down good work and lost money, but I don't regret it for a second. It's not fear that keeps me away. It's the feeling of walking into a room that wasn't meant for me. It's the embarrassment of an intrusion. That forest is a relic of the Ice Age. Whatever moves through it has been there longer than any of us. I was just the thing that didn't belong. They didn't stop for me. They just kept moving, doing whatever it is that things do. Not being stopped for is the closest thing to grace I'll get. I try to remember that on the hard days. When the world feels heavy, I think of those lights. And somehow, it almost works. I sit here in my study, the silence of the house pressing in on me. It's been 9 years, but the memory of that night on Roan Mountain remains as sharp as a fresh cut. I find myself tracing the grain of my desk, looking for some kind of anchor in the mundane. Sometimes I wonder if I should have just told Carol everything. Maybe the weight wouldn't be so heavy if I'd shared the burden. How do you explain something that defies every rule you've ever lived by? I look at my old field gear, the diameter tape and the clinometer sitting on the shelf. They look like relics from another life. I don't touch them much anymore, but I can't bring myself to throw them away either. The mountains are still there, of course. They don't care about my secrets or my hesitation. They just keep existing, indifferent to the small lives that pass through their shadows. I wonder if those lights are still moving through the spruce fir. I wonder if someone else is out there right now, standing in the dark, feeling that same cold prickle on the back of their neck. If they are, I hope they have the sense to stay still. I hope they don't try to chase them or capture them. Some things aren't meant to be measured, and some things aren't meant to be understood. I've learned to live with the uncertainty. She could tell something wasn't right. It wasn't the same. The birds just weren't singing, and the temperature had dropped like a stone. She realized there was something staring at her from the darkness. In this life, honesty is about the best you can hope for. I don't need to go back to Roan Mountain to know what I saw. The anger in their eyes, the sound of their voices, the terror in the camp, and the looks on their faces. The memory is enough. It's a part of me now, like a scar that doesn't hurt anymore, but reminds you where you've been. Maybe one day I'll tell the whole story.
You know, they have out there. They have something out there. This is not an accident. This is done on purpose.
But for now, this is enough. Even saying this out loud feels like a weight lifting. The mountains will keep their secrets, and I'll keep mine. And that's the way it should be. Some things are just meant to be left alone. I look out the window at the darkening woods behind my house. The trees here are nothing like the ones on Roan, but the shadows feel familiar. It's a quiet evening, the kind that makes you think about things you've tried to bury. Sometimes I wonder if the mountain is still waiting. Not for me specifically, but for anyone who wanders too far into the high spruce fir. It feels like a place that exists outside of our time. I remember the cold that night. It wasn't just the temperature, it was a stillness that felt heavy. In some areas, the atmosphere just felt tense and thick. You couldn't put your finger on it, but you could just feel the deep darkness around you. Like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I think about the lights again, those small, sourceless points of firelight moving through the trees. I know how it sounds when I say it out loud, but I know what I saw. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like realizing you've walked into a room that wasn't meant for you. There was a small opening in the brush, and I stepped into it. I was only there for a minute, but I felt this cold pocket of air. It wasn't warm. It was cold, and it was really still. The trees were talking to each other. I could hear it in the creaking of the wood, a language I didn't understand but felt in my bones. It was the sound of something ancient moving through the dark. I've spent my life measuring these mountains. I thought I knew them, but that night I realized there's a part of them that doesn't care about my tally sheets or my instruments. They just kept moving. They didn't stop for me, and I've come to realize that's a kind of grace. To be ignored by something that old, that powerful, it's a strange comfort. I don't go back to Rowan anymore. I don't need to. Anytime anyone tried to creep up on the thing, it would vanish into the darkness. It's part of me, like a scar that doesn't hurt, but reminds me where I've been. I try to remember that on the hard days. When the world feels too loud and too fast, I think about the high spruce fir and the lights and the silence. It almost works. I sit here in my kitchen, the coffee cooling in my mug. It's quiet, but the silence feels different now than it did before that night. We all knew they were watching us, feeling their eyes on us, watching us from the darkness between the trees. It was a heavy, expectant kind of quiet that stays with you. I look at my hands, the same hands that measured those trees. They're steady, but they remember the feeling of that mountain air. They remember the weight of the unknown. People ask me why I don't go back to Rowan. I tell them it's just work, but that's not the whole truth. The truth is, I don't want to intrude on that place again. It's a relic of the Ice Age, that forest. It's been there longer than any of us. longer than our roads or our contracts. It doesn't need us to define it. Whatever moves through those trees at night, it's been there all along. It's not waiting for us, and it's certainly not looking for our permission to exist. I was the intrusion. I was the thing that didn't belong, standing there with my instruments and my tally sheets. I was just a visitor in a house that was already occupied. They just kept moving. They didn't stop for me, and I've come to realize that's a kind of grace. To be ignored by something that old, that powerful, it's a strange comfort. I try to remember that on the hard days. When the world feels too loud and too fast, I think about the high spruce-fir, and the lights, and the silence. It almost works. The mountain is still there. It's still doing what it does, in the dark, in the cold, in the high places where the trees talk to each other in a language of creaking wood. And I'm here in my kitchen, drinking my coffee. I'm just a man who measures things, trying to find a little bit of grace in the quiet of the morning. I look at the coffee mug in my hands, feeling the warmth seep into my palms. It's a simple, grounding sensation that helps me stay anchored in the present. The kitchen is quiet, but the memory of that mountain air still lingers in the back of my mind. I think about the years I spent measuring timber, believing that everything could be reduced to numbers and data. I was so sure that the world was just a series of facts waiting to be recorded. I was wrong. This was a truth that I carried alone for nearly a decade. This is what they were calling the meeting. Like, this had to be done. They had to find a way. I don't know why. I just know that it did. And no one ever really talked about it after that, like it wasn't real. But it was. And you never saw it again. I'm finally letting some of that weight go by speaking it out loud. The high spruce-fir forest on Roan Mountain is a place that feels like it belongs to another time entirely. It's cold, it's dense, and it's ancient. It doesn't care about the people who walk through it with their instruments. I remember the way the trees creaked that night, a sound that wasn't just wind. It was a slow, deliberate movement that felt like the forest itself was shifting. That was the sound that I'll never forget. When I stepped outside my tent, I saw them. Tiny little dots of light moving through the trees. They weren't headlamps, and they weren't anything I could explain. They were just there. I stood there in the dark, completely still. I didn't want to be noticed. I felt like an intruder in a place that wasn't meant for me, and I knew better than to interfere. I've thought about those lights every day for 9 years. I've read about the Nunehi, the people who are always there, and it makes me realize how little I actually know about these mountains. I'm not afraid of them, not exactly. It's more like a quiet embarrassment, the feeling of walking into a room that was already occupied. I was the one who didn't belong. I've come to realize that not being stopped for is a kind of grace. I'm just a man who measures things, trying to find a little bit of peace in the quiet of the morning. It almost works. I look out the window at the morning light hitting the trees in my yard. It's a different kind of light than what I saw on the mountain, softer and more familiar. I'm trying to reconcile the man I was then with the man I am now. The mountains are still there, waiting for the next person to walk through them. I wonder if they'll see what I saw, or if they'll just see trees and rocks. Some things are only meant for those who are ready to look. I still have my gear in the closet, tucked away behind my winter coats. Sometimes I touch the diameter tape, just to feel the cold metal. It reminds me that the work was real, even if the rest of it feels like a dream. Carol asks me sometimes why I don't go back to Rowan. I tell her I've got enough work closer to home. It's a lie, but it's a kind one, meant to keep the peace. The forest doesn't need me to understand it. It just needs to exist. That's the lesson I've taken from all those years of measuring. I think about the people who might be listening to this. I hope they find some comfort in knowing they aren't the only ones who've seen things they can't explain. The world is full of things that don't have a name. We try to label them, to measure them, but sometimes we just have to let them be. I'm content with that now. I don't need to know everything. I just need to keep walking, keep measuring, and keep listening to the trees. The mountain is still there, and the lights are still moving. I'm okay with that.
It's a part of the world that I'm glad I got to see, even if I didn't understand it.
I'll keep carrying this, but it's lighter now. I'm just a man who measures things, and that's enough for me.